January 1547. A London courtier enters the king's chamber at Whitehall Palace and vomits, not from fear, but from the smell. The King of England is rotting alive. His legs weep pus through linen bandages thick as sailcloth. The stench cuts through perfume, through frankincense burned in braziers, through every attempt to mask it. It announces his presence before any herald ever could. He weighs over 400 pounds. He cannot walk. Servants hoist him with pulley systems, devices called engines, designed to move a body that can no longer move itself. He screams at people who aren't there. He clutches a walking stick topped with a human skull. He sniffs his own pus-soaked bandages, certain that enemies have poisoned the wounds. This is Henry VIII, the same man who once dazzled Europe as the Golden Renaissance prince. What happened? Secret physician records hidden for 4.5 centuries reveal the medical truth. In 1536, a jousting accident gave Henry a traumatic brain injury and reopened a leg wound that would never heal. That single moment condemned him to 11 years of advancing decay, chronic bone infection poisoning his blood, gangrenous ulcers spreading across both legs, and a mind fracturing under the pressure of constant pain and septic toxicity. This is not the story taught in schools. This is the suppressed anatomy of a tyrant's final decade, told through the medical evidence his court tried to bury. Watch what happens when a king's body becomes his prison and his madness becomes England's nightmare. January 24th, 1536. Greenwich Palace. The tilt yard is alive. Crowds pack the viewing stands. Banners snap in the cold air. This is not entertainment. This is a performance of kingship. Raw, violent, masculine power displayed in front of the entire court. Henry VIII, age 44, sits astride an armored warhorse. He wears full plate armor over half a ton of man, metal, and animal. In the stands are Jane Seymour, the woman he is courting, and in Boleyn, his current wife, pregnant. With what he praises a male heir, the lance is couched. The horse charges. Then the impact. Henry is thrown. The horse loses footing. Over half a ton of armored animal crashes down on top of him. The sound stops. The crowd goes silent. The king does not move. Minutes pass. Then an hour. Then another 2 hours. No speech. No movement. For the court, this is not just a medical emergency. This is the potential end of the Tudor dynasty. If Henry dies now, England has no clear male heir. The country could collapse back into the civil wars that his father ended. Every courtier in the stands is calculating. What happens if he dies? Who takes power? Who survives? Eustace Shopweis, the imperial ambassador, writes that the king was without speech. The terror is not recorded directly, but it saturates every account. The silence in the tilt yard is the silence of a kingdom holding its breath. Finally, Henry regains consciousness that he survives. He speaks. The immediate crisis passes, but 2 hours unconscious is not a minor event. In modern medical terms, loss of consciousness lasting that long indicates severe traumatic brain injury. The brain has been damaged. The consequences will not appear all at once. They will unfold slowly over years in changes so gradual that no one in 1536 can connect them to this single moment. Within days, and Boleyn miscarries. The child is male. She later claims the shock of seeing the king fall caused it. Henry, in his grief and rage, takes the miscarriage as a divine message. God is rejecting this marriage. 4 months later, and Boleyn is executed. The accident did not just break the king's body. It set in motion a chain of events that would reshape his mind, his court, and his country. The golden prince who rode into the tilt yard that morning did not ride out. What returned was something else, still alive, still king, but fundamentally altered in ways no one yet understood. The change is not immediate. It arrives in pieces before 1536. Henry VIII is known for calculation. He is ruthless, yes, but his cruelty follows logic. He maneuvers, he negotiates, he builds coalitions. His court fears him, but they can predict him. After 1536, the pattern breaks. 4 months after the accident, and Boleyn is arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and treason. The evidence is flimsy. The trial is a formality. She is beheaded on May 19th. The speed shocks everyone. The king, who once agonized for years over his first divorce, now moves with terrifying swiftness. This is not the end, it is the beginning. In 1540, Henry turns on Thomas Cromwell, the man who engineered his break from Rome, who built the administrative machinery of his reign, his most loyal and effective servant. Cromwell is arrested without warning, condemned without trial, and executed within weeks. Henry regrets it almost immediately. He is heard muttering that his counsel tricked him, that Cromwell was the most faithful servant he ever had. But regret does not bring back the dead, and it does not stop the pattern. Modern neurologists examining the historical record identify the signature of frontal lobe damage. The jousting accident likely destroyed tissue in the brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for impulse control, emotional regulation, and executive function. The symptoms align with traumatic brain injury, explosive anger, impaired judgment, paranoia, memory loss. Henry begins to see traitors everywhere. His rages become legendary. Spanish Chronicle describes him screaming at Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, like a madman when he learns of her alleged infidelities. He is heard shouting at night, arguing with people who are not there. Courtiers report that he speaks to the ghosts of his executed wives. He commissions a walking stick topped with a human skull. He carries it everywhere, a memento mori, a reminder of death. But whose death? His enemies? His wives? His own? The brain injury is invisible. No physician in the 16th century can diagnose it. But its effects are not invisible, they reshape the entire character of his reign. The court, which once operated on a brutal but comprehensible logic, becomes a minefield. Favor can turn to execution in a matter of days. Loyalty is no protection. Silence is no shield. The king's mind, damaged in a single moment of impact, becomes the most dangerous force in England. And it is only the beginning, because while his brain was breaking, his body was breaking too. The jousting fall did not just damage his brain. It destroyed his legs. Henry had varicose ulcers before 1536. Painful, but manageable. The impact of the fall reopened them. This time they did not close. The wounds were on both thighs. They grew. Within months they were the size of tennis balls. Deep craters weeping fluid constantly. The infection reached the bone. Osteomyelitis, that a chronic bone infection that 16th century medicine could neither cure nor even slow. The bone itself was rotting. This created a sequestrum. Dead bone shed fragments into the surrounding tissue. The body tried to fight the infection, flooding the area with white blood cells and fluid. The pressure built. The ulcers leaked. Everyday physicians unwrapped pus-soaked bandages, cleaned the wounds, and reapplied fresh dressings. Every day, the smell grew worse. Pus was not just unpleasant. It was the visible sign of a body eating itself from within. The infection seeded his bloodstream with bacteria. Constant low-grade sepsis. Fevers. Chills. Waves of sickness that never fully receded. His physicians tried everything 16th century medicine offered. Cauterization, red-hot irons pressed into the open wounds to burn away infected tissue. The theory was simple. Heat killed corruption. The reality was gangrenous burns. More dead tissue. More infection. Poultices made of lead compounds, mercury, and arsenic. Substances now known to be poisons, but then believed to draw out disease. They did nothing except add toxic metal exposure to an already failing system. Lancing. Cutting the ulcers open to drain them. Temporary relief. Then more scarring. More damage to the tissue's ability to heal itself. Nothing worked. The wounds remained open for 11 years. The smell became legendary. Courtiers retched when they approached him. Some vomited. Perfume could not mask it. Incense burned in braziers throughout the royal apartments could not mask it. The scent of rotting human flesh, of pus, of infection. Its saturated fabric, clung to skin, announced the king's presence before any trumpet. Servants tasked with changing his bandages worked in rotation. No one could endure it for long. And Henry knew. He knew they smelled him. He knew they recoiled. He knew his body had become an object of revulsion. This was the man who once defined himself through physical prowess. Hunting, jousting, dancing, wrestling. His body had been proof of divine favor, his justification for kingship. Now that same body was a prison of pain and rot. The psychological toll was immeasurable. He began sniffing his own bandages, convinced that enemies were introducing poison through the open wounds. Paranoia and infection reinforced each other in a cycle physicians could not interrupt. His legs could no longer bear his weight. He gained mass rapidly. Some estimates placed him at over 400 pounds by the 1540s, with a waist measuring 54 inches. Mobility became impossible. Devices were constructed, engines, primitive pulley systems, wheelchairs designed to move a body that could no longer move itself. It took multiple servants to transfer him from bed to chair, from chair to seat. The king who once rode at the head of armies now required mechanical assistance just to cross a room. And through it all, the wounds wept, the bone rotted. The infection continued its slow, relentless work. There was no cure, there was no relief, only the management of decay. His body was dying in pieces, 1 inch at a time, while his mind, already damaged, buckled under the weight of constant pain, toxic infection, and the knowledge that his decay was visible to everyone. The Golden Prince was gone. What remained was a rotting king trapped inside his own flesh, and the smell of that rot had become the smell of English power itself. The court adapted. It had no choice. Windsor, Hampton Court, Whitehall, these palaces became stages for an elaborate performance. The performance was simple. Pretend the king was not dying. Feast in halls hung with tapestries worth a knight's ransom. Musicians played. Courtiers wore silks and jewels. The surface gleamed. At the center sat Henry 400 pounds. Immobile, the stench of infection radiating outward despite the incense. Despite the perfumes courtiers dabbed frantically onto their sleeves. Servants moved him with engines, wooden frames with pulleys, reinforced chairs on wheels that it took 6 men to transfer him. The operation was carefully choreographed to preserve the illusion of dignity. But everyone present knew what they were watching. A king being hoisted like cargo. One spoke of it. The unwritten rules of survival were learned quickly by anyone new to court. Never stare at the king's legs. Never react to the smell. Never mention his mobility. Never reference his health directly. Praise his strength. Praise his wisdom. Agree with him. Always point one wrong word, point one visible moment of revulsion or pity, and you join the growing list of executed courtiers. Because the king's paranoia was now a constant presence, as overwhelming as the smell, he saw plots everywhere. A misplaced glance became evidence of treason, that a hesitation in speech became proof of conspiracy. The Earl of Surrey, one of England's finest poets, was executed in January 1547 for altering his coat of arms to a charge so minor it would normally warrant a fine. But Henry, in his final months, interpreted it as a claim to royal blood. Surrey was beheaded. Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, was executed in 1542 for adultery. The evidence was credible this time, but the king's reaction was not calculated political maneuvering. It was rage. Incoherent, screaming rage. Witnesses reported him shouting accusa, tie-ins like a madman, his face purple, spittle flying. The court fractured into factions, but the factions were not ideological. They were survival networks. The conservative Howards, the reformist Seymours, uncles to Prince Edward, the king's only male heir. Each side circled the dying king, whispering in his ear, using his paranoia as a weapon against rivals. Accuse your enemy of treason. Let the king's broken mind do the rest. This was not politics. It was survival. A system where proximity to power meant proximity to death. And the only defense was to feed someone else to the king's suspicion before it turned on you. The younger courtiers, those who arrived after 1536, never knew the earlier Henry to them. This was simply what kingship looked like. An enormous, rotting figure who had to be moved by machines, who erupted into incoherent fury without warning, whose favor could disappear between heartbeats. The older courtiers remembered. They remembered the athletic prince, the learned debater, the man who could charm foreign ambassadors and intimidate his own bishops with equal skill. That man was gone. The psychological weight was crushing. You served a king whose mind was as broken as his body. You smiled. You bowed. You brought him reports. You awaited his pleasure. And you never, ever showed that you noticed the pus seeping through the bandages, or the way his eyes sometimes focused on empty corners of the room, or the skull-topped walking stick he gripped as though it were a scepter. The court was a gilded cage, beautiful, deadly, inescapable, and the man at its center, rotting and raging, was both prisoner and warden. A king trapped inside a failing body, and a body that had trapped everyone around him in a theater of decay. BY 1545. The king can no longer hold a pen long enough to sign documents. His hands shake. The pain from his legs radiates upward, constant and all-consuming. Fevers come in waves. Some days he is lucid. Other days he drifts half-present, his eyes glazed with pain and infection. The business of governing England cannot stop. Laws must be passed. Warrants must be signed. Treaties must be sealed. The solution is a device called the dry stamp, a wooden block carved with a precise replica of Henry's signature. Press it into paper. The impression leaves a faint indentation that a clerk traces over it with ink. The result looks identical to the king's own hand. In theory, the stamp is a convenience. The king approves a document. The stamp is applied. Government continues. In practice, the stamp becomes a weapon. A small group of men controls access to it. The Seymour faction, led by Edward Seymour, uncle to 9-year-old Prince Edward, the heir, John Dudley, William Paget. Men who understand that the king's signature is now a tool they can wield. They bring stacks of documents to Henry's bedside. He is feverish or in pain or simply exhausted by the effort of remaining conscious. They explain quickly that he nods or waves a hand or says nothing. The stamp is applied. Later, in private, additional documents appear, grants of land, appointments to office, and, crucially, attainders, legal death sentences that bypass trial. The Duke of Norfolk, the most powerful nobleman in England and a rival to the Seymours, is attainted in December 1546. His execution is scheduled for January 28, 1547. The king almost certainly approved it. But did he understand what he was signing? Did he read the document? Did the Seymours present it clearly, or bury it in a stack of routine business while Henry drifted in and out of feverish confusion? No one will ever know. The dry stamp erases the line between the king's will and his council's ambition. England is ruled by a dying man's signature, controlled by a faction preparing for the next reign. Henry is a puppet, but the puppet still breathes, still screams, still occasionally exerts his will with terrifying force. The Seymours must wait. January 1547. Whitehall Palace. The king is visibly failing now. His body is swollen with fluid, congestive heart failure. His heart can no longer pump effectively against the constant infection, the years of strain, the sheer mass it must supply with blood. His skin is gray. His breathing is labored. The ulcers on his legs have become necrotic caverns, black at the edges. But no one can tell him he is dying. The Treason Act of 1534 makes it a capital crime to predict the king's death. The law was designed to stop conspiracies and rebellions, but it has an unintended consequence. The king's own physicians and counselors are too terrified to inform him of his condition. Days pass, he worsens. Finally, Sir Anthony Denny, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, enters the royal bedchamber. He is pale and he kneels. Your Majesty, in the opinion of all your physicians, you are in great danger. It is time to prepare yourself. Silence. Then Henry speaks. His voice is weak but steady. What is your judgment? Can I live? No, your Majesty, not by nature's course. Henry closes his eyes. When he opens them, he asks for Archbishop Cranmer. Cranmer is sent for, but he is at Croydon, miles away. By the time he arrives, Henry can no longer speak. Cranmer takes the king's hand. Give me a sign that you trust in Christ. Henry squeezes once. At 2 o'clock in the morning on January 28, 1547, Henry VIII dies. The death is kept secret for 3 days. No announcement is made. Meals are still delivered to the king's chambers. Courtiers are told he is resting. The Seymours use the time to secure key positions, move loyalists into power, and ensure that when the death is finally announced, their control is absolute. On January 31st, young Prince Edward is informed that he is now King Edward VI. He is only 9 years old. The same day, the public is told. Londoners weep. Church bells toll. The news spreads across England, then across Europe. But the king's body is already on the move. Henry's corpse is embalmed. Or rather, an attempt is made. At 400 pounds, with widespread infection and organ failure. The process is incomplete. The internal organs are removed and placed in a lead casket. The body is wrapped in cerecloth, placed in a lead-lined coffin, then enclosed in a wooden outer case. The coffin is enormous. It requires a reinforced cart. The journey from Westminster to Windsor is slow. On the night of February 14th, the procession stops at St. Abbey. The coffin is placed in the chapel. Guards are posted. Candles are lit. During the night, something happens. Gases build inside the sealed coffin, the natural result of decomposition, accelerated by the body's size, and the incomplete embalming. Pressure increases. The lead lining splits. The next morning, workmen entering the chapel find fluid pooled on the stone floor beneath the coffin. The smell is immediate and overwhelming. There are dogs, strays, or perhaps the abbey's own dogs. They are licking the fluid from the floor. The workmen drive them away. The coffin is hastily repaired. The incident is cleaned up, barely recorded, and the procession continues. But the story does not stay buried. Years earlier, a Franciscan friar named William Peto had publicly condemned Henry's treatment of Catherine of Aragon. In his sermon, he invoked the biblical King Ahab, whose blood was licked by dogs as divine punishment for his sins. I tell you, the dogs will lick your blood as they licked Ahab's. Henry had been furious. Peto fled England. Now, in a chapel at St. Abbey, the prophecy is fulfilled. The king who reshaped a nation, who broke from Rome, who executed 2 wives, and countless counselors, who ruled through fear and spectacle. His blood is licked from the floor by scavenging dogs. The image is grotesque. It is biblical. It is perfect. The golden prince who once dazzled Europe ends as a burst coffin and a spreading stain. The official portraits show a different man. Broad shoulders, a commanding gaze, jeweled doublets stretched across a pow,